Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. When I was a child, I often heard the statement that the Quran is the greatest miracle any prophet was given. And to be honest, even though I heard that statement quite often, I never understood what it meant. So, with that in mind, let's ask ourselves a question. What practical characteristics of the Quran classify it as a miracle? Normally, when people talk about the Quran being a miracle, a lot of emphasis is put on the linguistic beauty of the Quran. In other words, when scholars talk about the Quran being a miracle, they mostly talk about the beauty of the Quranic language. But let's approach this topic somewhat differently and talk about the practical factors that classify the Quran as a miracle. Let's start with this point. One of the miraculous characteristics of the Quran is the preservation of the Quran. The fact of the matter is that even secular historians accept and agree with the fact that the Quran is the only holy book that has not been changed. Not a single letter in the Quran has been changed in the last 1400 years. It is the only holy book that still exists in its original text. That itself is a testament of the Quran's miraculous nature. However, here's the very interesting point. One of the reasons we call the Quran a miracle is because not only has the Quran been preserved in its original form, but the Quran actually predicts its own preservation. Again, not only has the Quran been preserved, but the true miracle is that the Quran predicts its own preservation. In the 9th verse of the 15th surah, Allah makes the promise that not only has Allah revealed the Quran, but He will also be its protector and keep it preserved for the coming generations. And the fact that the promise of Allah has proven to be true is another reason the Quran is a miracle. And not only is the Quran preserved, but the active study of the Quran is thriving more than ever. After 1400 years, the Quran is not just sitting in a museum. It's not just sitting in some archive. Instead, there are more people studying the Quran today than ever in human history. And not only that, but the second practical reason that the Quran is a miracle is because of the memorization of the Quran. And there are more people who have memorized the Quran today than ever in human history. There are various estimates, but even if we look at the lower estimates, it is estimated that over 5 million living people have memorized the entire Quran. 5 million people living today have memorized the Quran from cover to cover. By comparison, according to Christian publications, there is not a single living person today who has memorized the Bible cover to cover. And according to Jewish publications, there are only a handful of people today who have memorized the Torah cover to cover. Yet, the memorization of the Quran continues to thrive with each coming generation. And this is another interesting fact about the Quran's memorization. The vast majority of people who memorize the Quran, who we call Hafiz of the Quran, are not scholars. Most people who memorize the Quran are everyday Muslims. In fact, it is estimated that over half the people who have memorized the Quran are not native Arabic speakers. In other words, over half the people who have memorized the entire Quran do not have Arabic as their native language. Think about that. How can anybody who does not speak a certain language memorize over 6,000 verses in that language? How can somebody who does not speak Arabic or does not understand Arabic memorize over 6,000 verses in Arabic? How can this be explained in any other way than to say that the language of the Quran itself is miraculous and comes from a divine origin? Every single hafiz of the Quran is a living miracle of the Quran. The fact that even people who don't speak Arabic, even people who have no formal education, even people who are not scholars can memorize the Quran is a testament to the miraculous nature of the Quran.